Hello and welcome to the Frans van Kat interview. I'm Annette Young. For many of us, September 11th, 2001 was a defining moment. It became a bookend, if you like, to a decade that saw the West pitting itself against the worst of Islamic extremism. And it ended, appropriately enough, with this year's Arab uprisings, where we've seen mass protests across the region demanding democratic reform. As we mark the 10th anniversary of that momentous day, I'm joined in the studio by Gilles Keppel. He's one of France's best-known scholars of the Islamic and Arab world and a professor at Sciences Po here in Paris, not to mention a prolific author as well. Gilles Keppel, thank you so much for giving us your time. 10 years on, looking back to 9/11, how did that day change the face of terrorism?
Well, I believe that it sort of focused this issue of terrorism on Islamic radical groups. I mean, in the past decade, you had other types of terrorism, particularly here in Europe, where you had the Basque terrorists, the Italian terrorists, the German terrorists, and what have you. Terrorism could be found in the extreme left, in the extreme right, but then suddenly the word terrorism seemed to be equated with the most radical, or what we call the Salafi jihadi dimension of Islamist movements.
Did 9/11 actually embolden alQaeda? It certainly spawned a series of franchises, if you like, going from Jeremiah Islamiyah in Indonesia right through to alQaeda's North African wing, didn't it?
Well, from then on, if you said that you were alQaeda any place, you would be sure, to make the news. If you said I would Jamaah Islamiyah something, I mean, no one would give a glance to it. So it was something, of course, that helped those groups, wherever they were, to get media attention. And media attention was key to their success, because al-Qaeda, in a way, was a blend of the most violent action possible. I mean, blasts, bombing, assassinations of hostages, broadcast live, and the new surge of satellite television, and then afterwards, in its second period, the use of the internet, YouTube, Daily Motion, and what have you. And therefore, the branding, if you wish, was extremely important. The al-Qaeda branding, I believe, was as famous as Coca-Cola sometime. I mean, it's now probably gone down, but it was a big issue.
With the killing of Osama bin Laden back in May this year, where is al-Qaeda at this moment in time? What's happened to the organisation?
Well, it's not that much, I believe, anymore. And even when bin Laden was killed in mid-May of this year, physically, I mean, he had already been dead politically for at least, I believe, say 5 years. Their great momentum was the war in Iraq, which they wanted to turn into a jihad that would mobilize the Arab and Muslim masses, just like the jihad in Afghanistan in the 80s had mobilized the Muslim masses against the Red Army of the Soviet Union. I mean, they sort of wanted to liken the two. In both cases, you had a so-called Crusader army invading the land of Islam. And this should be the engine or the fuel for what is called in Arabic defensive jihad, i.e. a sort of an obligation for Muslims to mobilize,
to take up arms.
Absolutely, to take up arms or to pay a tithe or to speak against that. And that would have given a significant credit to al-Qaeda as a sort of vanguard of the Muslim and Arab world, which is what they sought. When you think of 9/11, when you put it into perspective, the reason it happened was that in the 1990s, all those groups that had mushroomed out of the jihad in Afghanistan in the 80s, whether the radical Tanzim al-Jihad or Jamaah Islamiyah in Egypt, the armed Islamic group in Algeria, likewise groups in Bosnia, in Chechnya, in Kashmir, and you name them, had proved incapable, unable to mobilize the masses under their lead. And the feeling in al-Qaeda's ranks, and more than bin Laden, the ideologue is the present, supposedly the present leader of al-Qaeda, the Egyptian MD Ayman Zawahiri. Zawahiri wrote a booklet in which he explained that the masses were afraid of the state apparatus, which was strong, which was backed by the West. So if you manage to strike at the West, to expose its weakness, as was the case in 9/11, where the Twin Towers were struck, then the masses would not be afraid of the powers that be, who were the puppets of the West, if you wish, and that would ease the way for al-Qaeda to achieve their aims. But it proved a failure. It proved a failure in Iraq particularly, where they thought they would launch jihad, meaning a sort of general effort of the Muslim world against the West, against the enemy. But what really happened in Iraq was the opposite of jihad, which is what is called in Arabic fitna, i.e. division. Chaos, division between the ranks of Muslims. And actually, many more Iraqis were killed by suicide bombings perpetrated by al-Qaeda in Iraq than were Americans or so-called crusader soldiers.
Now, with the benefit of hindsight, it's very easy to be critical of the West's response to what happened at the time. But just how effective was the war against terror?
Well, it was not that effective because it sort of focalized a sort of a divide of the West versus the rest, if you wish. And even though President Bush was keen to search Muslim allies, and he singled out Shias originally in Iraq for that, which became afterwards his enemies. Nevertheless, the war on terror, the war against terror, was still managed as a war against an enemy that would be another state, and it took a lot of time for the West and for Western intelligence, for the Western military, to understand and to grasp the nature of the threat. And what was very impressive with the way President Obama's administration terminated bin Laden was that it came at a timely moment when bin Laden was not really someone with whom the Arab masses or the Muslim masses, quote unquote, could identify. So there was not much reaction of grief except in small groups. And B, they were shrewd enough sort of to destroy not only his body but his image. And the fact that they buried him in the sea to be eaten by the sharks of the Arabian Gulf was a very wise move from a political point of view, because there was nothing to worship. After all, bin Laden was left to what it was, an image, or even a virtual image, if you wish. And as he disappeared, and as there was no image of his corpse, of his body, or none made public, then he was just deleted, as if when you press the delete key
and
on the keyboard.
For a martyr's remembrance site either. Just bringing this forward to what's happened this year and with the Arab Spring, the presence of al-Qaeda doesn't seem to be very much there, does it, in those protests that we've seen in North Africa and elsewhere in the Middle East?
Well, in terms of ideology, if you wish.
Is there influence waning as such? I mean, what does it say about...
No, I think they have become irrelevant politically. I mean, they have lost momentum. Even though, a number of people in the Arab world, I mean, let's face it, were quite happy when they saw what happened to the towers, because they thought it was a slap in the face to the arrogant West, and so on and so forth. Those, don't say that anymore nowadays, because they feel that, either they feel some guilt or they were duped, because they understand that what 9/11 brought to the Arab world was an extra 10 years for authoritarian rulers like the Mubaraks and the Ben Alis and what have you, who then could say to Washington or the European Union, hey guys, we're not great, but we're the best you can have as a bulwark against Al-Qaeda.
The better the devil you know versus the devil you don't. That was their
Well,
line.
yeah, they were not even devils to some. They were sort of angels or people who had their savings fructify. And that was one thing. And the other was that Al-Qaeda at the time was perceived as being able to mobilize, to bring together a number of groups, and this sort of was wiped away by the Arab revolutions, because they did not use their vocabulary at all. On the contrary, and they sort of originally the reason to dispose of Ben Laden, of Ben Ali, Mubarak, and the others was that. It was not that they were not good Muslims, that they were corrupt, that they were not Democrats. And as the phrase has it, it was, after 9/11, better Ben Ali than Ben Laden. Now that Ben Laden had disappeared, there was no need for Ben Ali and his likes anymore.
Gilles Keppel, I'm terribly sorry, that's all we have time for, and that's it for this edition of the Franz van Kat interview. If you're interested in pursuing some of the issues that Gilles has mentioned, you can follow me on my Twitter account, which is @AnnetteF24. Stay tuned for more news and headlines, which are coming up shortly.